Of a string quartet by a composer from Venezuela named Teresa Carreño. She was amazing. She was a composer, which means she wrote music. She was a conductor, which means she conducted orchestras. She played the piano, and she was a soprano, so she sang, and she was accomplished at all of them. She was really amazing. Our program today is called Women in Music, and it's all about women in various aspects of music. And when I say we, I mean the Rockefeller String Quartet. We are from the Arkansas Symphony Orchestra. And so, what is a string quartet? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Strings means we all play string instruments, and quartet means there are four of us. So we have in a string quartet 2 violins. Could you guys put your instruments up? See, they're kind of like people. They look a little different, but they are the same instrument. They play the same notes. Usually, Linnaea here is sitting in the first violin position today, and she would play the first violin part, which is usually the higher notes, and because they're higher, there's a lot of melody in that part. And Trisha's playing the second violin part, and that is usually plays a little bit lower. Often it pairs with the first violin and the melody, or sometimes it plays harmony in the middle, along with, I'm Kater, and this is a viola. So the viola is, of course, bigger than the violin, and it's lower than the violin. So it plays notes in the middle of the quartet. Sometimes it's a little bit lost in the quartet because the notes are in the middle, but it's kind of like the peanut butter and jelly in your sandwich. It's the good stuff in the middle, that's the viola. And then, of course, last but not least, our great big instrument over here that Jacob plays is the cello. And the cello is the biggest, and it's the lowest. So it plays what we call a bass line. Very often it plays those foundation notes at the bottom of a string quartet.
Okay, next that we're going to present for you today is a composer. Her name is Hildegard von Bingen. So Hildegard von Bingen lived in what is present-day Germany, but she lived there about 900 years ago. So she was composing music well before Beethoven, well before Mozart. Now when you listen to her music next to Beethoven or Mozart, it might sound a little bit more simple, but back in this time, the composing rules that you had to follow were very strict. So much of it was monophonic, so just one line of music at a time. And Hildegard von Bingen lived on a monastery as an abbess, which means she was the head of a group of nuns. She was fascinating as well because she was also a philosopher and a writer and an early scientist.
So next up, we are going to talk a little bit about violin makers who were women. So if you look at the picture here, you see the inside of a workshop where they make violins. It's quite interesting. There's tools and wooden slabs, and there's a lady making the instruments in the corner. And when we think of people who make violins, we talk the most often about men who lived in Italy about 400 years ago, names like Antonio Stradivarius, Niccolò Amati, Giuseppe Guarneri. But less known, but also very important, are the women who have been making instruments for hundreds of years. And one of the first that we know of was Katherine Guarneri, who interestingly was the wife of Giuseppe Guarneri. And at first she was an apprentice in his instrument making workshop, but she gradually took a more active role as he started making fewer instruments in his old age. And after her, there were violin makers in Germany, like Olga Adelman, who started her own violin school. And even today, more recently in 2018, a woman from China named Yanli Wang won third prize at the Malta International Violin Making Competition. And she was having her violins checked along with men and women from all over the world. So we're very happy with what women have managed to do with the art of violin making. Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to talk about women composers. We're going to talk about a specific woman composer. Her name was Fanny Mendelssohn, and she was an accomplished pianist, but a very, very accomplished composer as well. She composed 460 pieces of music that we know of. She was German, and her brother is the more famous Felix Mendelssohn, who is also a very accomplished composer, musician, very prolific writer, composer of music, and wrote a lot of music as well. She unfortunately lived in the shadows of her brother because this is the 1800s. So women could not get their music published in the 1800s. So it's possibly thought that some of the music that she wrote might have had her brother's name on it, but in fact could have been written by Fanny rather than Felix. So we're going to perform a piece this is from her string quartet, written in 1834, and hope you enjoy.
Okay, the next topic we'll cover is female conductors. So historically, the role of conductor would have belonged to men, and fortunately today we've had female conductors lead major orchestras all across the world. And it's a very important job because you are responsible for getting at times up to 100 or more people to come in the same time at the same way. It's very difficult. And we've been fortunate this year to have two conductors with us in the ASO, Joanne Folletta and Carolyn Kwan.
Okay, so our next piece is by a composer named Florence Price. Florence Price actually lived for a good part of her life here in Little Rock, Arkansas, so we claim She was very accomplished. She, however, was an African-American composer in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and she had a lot of opposition. But still, she succeeded. She actually was the first female African-American composer to have a major work performed, there we go, by a major orchestra. The Chicago Symphony played her first symphony. And interestingly, next year they are scheduled to play her fifth symphony. Just wonderful. This is an African-American, her version of an African-American spiritual, her variations. It's called Swing Low, Sweet Chariot.
Women performers. Some of the more famous performers that you would probably recognize right away are maybe Lady Gaga, Carrie Underwood, country singer. So those are some more famous names, pop singers, types of things like that. Maybe more obscure would be like the more famous musicians like violinists, like Midori. You've probably heard of the famous cellist. So those are performers. We're going to perform a piece for you right now that was written by a performer named Stephanie Berg, and she plays the clarinet. But she also wrote this piece called Colors Mostly Lush. She's actually a clarinetist in the Arkansas Symphony, so we know her very well. She's a good friend of ours, and we're very happy that we can play her piece for her. So this piece, we would like for you to watch as we change the vibrato in our hand. So we're either going to be using vibrato or not using vibrato. And she actually writes this in the piece, senza vibrato, no vibrato, or vibrato. So I think that's what she was trying to get when she labeled this Colors Mostly Lush. She was trying to get these different colors to come out from the string quartet. So see if that makes any difference on your end. one more female performer to feature. This is a local country singer. Her name is Bonnie Montgomery. She's very well known in the Arkansas area, central Arkansas area. And she has a beautiful, beautiful velvety voice. And in this particular arrangement, which was actually arranged by our violinist from the symphony, her name is Katherine Williamson. And she wrote the melody to in the viola and the second violin, so with the lower strings, to kind of match Bonnie's more lush, velvety voice. So this is called Comets by Bonnie Montgomery.
All right, so the final piece we are playing today in our Women in Music demonstration is by a very important composer named Jennifer Higdon. Now, just to give an idea of how celebrated she is today, the American League of Orchestras claimed that she is one of the most widely performed living composers, so her music is really played everywhere. And just to show a little bit of what this has brought her, she has made not one, but she has won 3 Grammy Awards for her compositions and a Pulitzer for her violin concerto, which was premiered by Hilary Hahn, another important violinist who's a woman who plays music. So a little bit about this piece. It's based on a hymn that we all know and love, Amazing Grace. And you'll notice that she kind of passes the melody between the instruments. So it starts out in the cello, and it goes to the first violin. And she adds textures and more harmonies as the piece goes on.